Hello, my name is Monique Carmela. I am a trauma-informed feminine empowerment, self-love, and relationships coach. I created the Good Girl Unleashed podcast as a way to support you on your journey to liberating yourself from limiting beliefs, trauma, suppression, so that we can all come home and live authentically and unapologetically. I support my clients and my community with resolving trauma, releasing suppressed emotions in a safe, supportive way that allows them to reconnect to their authentic self and create a deeply fulfilling life and rich, nourishing relationships. I'm so grateful that you're here. Let's dive into today's episode. So I am here with Amberlee again.
Hello.
We've had so many potent conversations, and it just sparks a lot of different ideas and things that we can share on the podcast. So I'm excited to have you back. And what we're going to be exploring today is around family dynamics, relationships, impacts in our relationship, and we'll see where else it takes us. But last week when we were connecting, it came up somehow around how we can expect the men in our life or like our partners to be a certain way because of our upbringing and maybe how our dad was, how our dad showed up in the world or in our relationship with him. And obviously this can also be with how we interacted with our mother and just those family dynamics and how it can impact our relationships today. And I've definitely noticed that happening in my own relationship. And this is something that we were talking about. Like for me, my dad was always like the, I guess, traditional, like hard work, or what feels traditional to me, but like that hardworking breadwinner kind of going to work. Like he was up before everyone else. Like he would wake up at 4 a.m. and he was off to work between 5 and 6, and he was working all day, and he was just like that main provider, as well as someone that was always really reliable. Like I could just ask for his help with something and he was just there straight away. And it's something that I've always really cherished and felt really blessed. But then what has happened is like he's become like the man that I would compare all other men to. And it would definitely impact my relationship of like I'm expecting my partner to be similar, of like, you should be the breadwinner, you should be the provider, you should be like working maybe a full-time job. Like these are some of these could be unconscious for a part of our relationship, and then they would become more aware. And it's like my present self doesn't expect him really, like knowing who he is. I would never expect him to do the traditional kind of 9 to 5 full-time job. It's not even something that I put on myself anymore. But there's still like that underlying conditioning of like, you should be the main breadwinner, you should be the provider. That's what it means to be a man, or being good with your hands, or being reliable. Like when I ask, like I want it done straight away. And that shows me that you love me. And it's quite fascinating because my love language, when you go through the book 5 Love Languages, is acts of service. And that's really how my dad shows love, is through acts of service. And so my partner will show love more through physical touch, like quality time and being present, like emotional support. It's very different to, I guess, what I received growing up. I didn't have that emotional support growing up, so it's quite unfamiliar. Yeah, so it was just really fascinating that this came up, and then we're like, let's do another episode and chat more about it, and just start to bring that awareness of what are we expecting of the people in our lives because of what we experience as children, not only in the, say, household, but this can obviously ripple out of what we experience in other areas of life too.
Thank you. It was really interesting hearing you speak to all of those layers again, because we've spoken about it, I guess, 1.5 times already, and each time we have, like, there's new things coming up for me as I'm listening to you speak about those experiences. And one of the things that came through then was how we almost shape our definitions of a quality or trait depending on how we've previously experienced that quality or trait. But it's also not necessarily true to what that experience or trait is, if that, yeah, it makes sense to you at all. And in terms of, yeah, reliability, there was like a flavor of reliability that you were speaking to before about your partner, how you keep having this thought in your head that he's not reliable, but then you could actually see the real way and list all the ways that he is actually an extremely reliable partner.
Mm.
And then I could feel into the way that I was raised as well, which is I actually had a very similar situation with my dad, where I was also completely and utterly treated like a princess. And he would also come to everything at the drop of a hat. And he was fortunate enough, like to the point where I grew up, he was an electrician, well, still is an electrician. But he had kind of like complete flexibility that if I called him to come take me somewhere, or it was raining and I didn't want to walk somewhere, he could leave work, or come and pick me up between jobs or whatever, um, to chauffeur me around. And I could hear then, oh, for some reason, I think somebody dropping everything, to rush to me to do something for me, without actually even checking into their own priorities or needs. I actually think that's reliability. And I'm not sure if that's what you're experiencing, but I'm like, if I was to define reliability in my current self, I guess a little bit more conscientiously, or with some respect to my partner being a whole person with their own needs and their own values and their own time. And I possibly wouldn't think that's an appropriate response anymore, but I can see the parts and the patterns of my own inner princess that would be like, no, I'm important. I should be number one. And that also doesn't receive no very well, from a whole lifetime of not really receiving that many no's from my father and only receiving them from my mother. So
Yeah.
receiving a no from my partner is very confronting, and has been, I guess, like a consistent practice over the last few years is receiving no, and there's been an agreement between us to explore that, because I sort of had to say at the beginning, I probably will have some extreme responses in my body around that, and receiving that as personal rejection, and receiving that in such an extreme way that I feel like I'm dying, or that I'm in an extremely unsafe situation. And yeah, I'd love if you could just keep exploring no with me, and keep just holding loving presence and holding a loving witness when those reactions come up. So that's, I guess, a way that so far I've been able to work with some of those dynamics that I'm aware of, because there's plenty of times those things come up, where that comparison is that I don't even see. But yeah, just as you were talking about that, I'm like, oh yeah, that was something that I used to really feel, was that reliability meant chucking everything out the door, and I would have to be at my beck and call, is what, like, I think of that as, and like almost as if, and I just have this really fun image in my head of just like this kind of, I'm actually picturing my niece kind of as she like walks around, she's 3, and she always says, I'm the queen, and she tells all of us that we're her servants and that we have to like do everything for her. I'm like, wow, yeah, actually I probably held that energy in my relationship between father and daughter for a very long time. And of course, that's now patterned in my body in the way that I'm relating. So it's sort of really humorous to me now, feeling and seeing it and sensing it in that way, just from you describing how that was impacting you. So thank you for like pulling that out in a really unexpected manner.
And that's the really cool thing about like delving into these layers and doing this like integrative work is that instead of wronging or shaming that part, we can have a bit of a giggle and have a lot of compassion. And like even what was coming up just when we are talking about like this is what it means to be reliable. It's also like
Mm,
this is how I receive love. This is how I know I'm loved. If like you drop everything and you just do the thing that I need in the moment, that's how I know I'm loved. And yeah, like just when I was talking about like the five love languages of like I feel most loved when like my partner's doing those acts of service, and
mm,
because he shows love in a different way for quite a bit of our relationship, I didn't feel loved, even though it's like I could know that I was loved, but I wasn't feeling it. And that was also another experience I had growing up. I knew my parents loved me, but I didn't feel loved. And that it was very
mm,
strange for me. I was like, but I know that they love me. So why am I feeling so unlovable and so unloved? And it's quite fascinating that that's an experience that I had within my current relationship. And it's been like repatterning how I experience love, how I know I'm loved, how I receive love, but also bringing that love to myself. But yeah, it's quite fascinating just how those dynamics and yeah, I really like how they play out, not only like how it's happened in the childhood, but how it impacts our current relating and our current relationships. And I really resonate with like the princess because that's definitely how I felt like my dad raised us was like these little princesses that like instead of showing us how to do it for ourselves, he would just do it. And then I
mm.
actually started to connect to how much less I would trust myself in being like capable of doing things for myself.
Mm,
And
mhm.
so I even shared with Liam recently, I was like, there's like this interesting thing that happens. Like when you're here, it's like I feel like I'm bound to mess things up. Like I'm this damsel that comes through, this damsel
Yeah.
energy. And it's quite fascinating because we have a big kind of joke around how terrible I am with directions and geography. And
Mm,
like I was a pretty
mm,
good student. Like I'm really good at memorizing. So I'd memorize like pages and pages of notes and I'd do really good on tests and stuff. But mapping, I just could not figure out. But if I were to go for a walk and get lost, I can feel it in my body when I've gone the wrong way
mm.
or when I've missed the exit or if I'm driving somewhere, I can feel it. But when Liam would be present, I would be in so much self doubt that I would really struggle to find my way. And I would just rely on him and I
Mm,
would just wait for him to guide me because he's so good at being the guide. And even just in that, like noticing how that was the case growing up, like I wasn't really given the space to figure it out for myself or supported to learn the skill. It was like, I'll just do it for you.
mm. Yeah, it's really interesting because I can feel myself very resistant to go down this certain avenue, but also recognizing that it's so important, but it's a 3 hour week long conversation as well, in the way that that's a cultural consequence of patriarchal gender positions and norms, and it's something that I guess I work with in spaces with women a lot is how the patriarchal feminine and the patriarchal masculine, and just to be clear, I'm not talking about the energetics of masculine and feminine energy that are gender neutral, but speaking specifically to the societal structures and expectations and positions that have been created. Um, is that women are perpetually kind of stuck or placed in this childlike and capable position of the damsel, of the princess, that's never actually really truly allowed to grow up in a way, um, and is over reliant. based on all of these structures and these systems, on the masculine man or whatever role that becomes, to be the savior, to be the hero. Like, it's so ingrained and indoctrinated and perpetuated in our culture, just out of sight. I mean, you can look at it as just the family dynamic, but once you start to like pull that out into the bigger Western culture, that is so strong, and you can kind of then I guess play with that, how that feels in your how it felt at school, how it feels in your friendships, how it translates into work and into relationships, and then having your own children. But um, yeah, I guess those of us that are at the position in the family line where we're the ones kind of saying, oh, actually, I don't want to play these dynamics out
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
Like it's quite a lot.
Yeah, and then you feel like that, I guess, that black sheep, like that's what I hear. A lot of people
Mm,
resonating with me or the podcast or what I share or that I work with, like a lot of us resonate with being like that black sheep because it's like we're the one going against the grain, we're the one shifting the
mm,
patterns. And it can be, it's quite a confronting experience. And it's like we all want to fit in, we all want to be loved and accepted. And so there is like a, almost like an attractive quality to playing into these dynamics, to getting like this idea of
yeah.
fitting in, to being like accepted, to being part of the clan. Whereas almost stepping out, it's like, oh, am I going to be loved? Am I going to be accepted? And so I was also, we were speaking about it just before the call, like this pendulum swing. Like I've found that I've like my whole journey in so many different layers has been like this pendulum swing of going back and forth, and it's something that I actually weave into my work. Like it's not even a bad thing. It's like
Mm,
let's pendulate consciously of like let's lean into this, let's feel some of this discomfort and then let's resource. And also giving yourself space if you do go into old ways of conditioning or habits or dissociation or distracting as you're doing this deeper work. We tend to kind of shame ourselves in that, like,
mm,
but it makes a lot of sense why we would pendulate as we're stepping into this new awareness and this new paradigm shift and these new ways of relating. Like, it's quite uncomfortable to actually see what we've been in and to step out of it.
hmm
But I've noticed how much like that reclamation of personal power and having the self-awareness and being brutally honest with myself, taking radical self-responsibility, actually like opening up to, okay, I don't know how to do this. Maybe this isn't my like forte kind of thing, but let me get my hands dirty and let me give it a go. And even like my business
mm,
has been a massive initiation because I'm learning so many new skills all the time, things that I've never done before, that are uncomfortable, that require putting myself out there. And so it's like there can be this kind of, I want to go back and just go back into the box or the hiding
mm,
or the playing small or like the conditioning because it can feel safer. But because of like, yeah, the more we do this work, the more we come home to ourselves, it's like for me, there's no going back. But sometimes it's
mm.
like, oh, but I just want to. But what I've found is like, even just in like, I know a lot of our conversations with you, noticing that shift and that transition of where I have been projecting those family dynamics or even the
Mm,
societal conditioning of, yeah, like needing that savior or that knight in shining armor or like the man to be the breadwinner and to take care of me. And I'm like, I need a break. Like you do the thing, you go and do that, and quote unquote be the man. And
mm,
yeah, just noticing how it's all that projection of like my partner, when we'll talk about reliability, like he's so reliable in so many ways, but it can be really easy to focus on where he's not being reliable, or he's so
mm,
loving in like such deep ways that I would focus on where he's maybe where I'm seeing him not be loving. And we can see how when we focus on the lack, how it impacts our relationship. When we focus on where they are showing up, how much that shifts the relationship. And I've spoken about this quite a bit on the podcast and in different realms or different places, but just shifting into more of that appreciation for who someone truly
Mm,
is, rather than expecting them to be someone you think that they should be because of the conditioning or the family dynamics or what we experienced. Actually seeing someone for who they are and appreciating, acknowledging someone for who they are. And I feel like that really starts with ourselves. Like, it became easier for
mm,
me to really see someone else when I was doing the work to really see myself.
mm, yeah. And there's kind of two layers that I feel that come with that as well. And it's um, the the layer of also, where am I not, like, where is this conditioning coming from? Like, is this true? Is this actually something that I need them to be doing? Or and then there's also the layer of, am I putting this on them because I'm actually not showing up for myself in what I need right now? Am I not being that inner partner for myself right now? Am I outsourcing what I actually need to be providing myself with love?
Yeah.
Um, Comes up, I guess, a lot in the way that I'm choosing to relate now. Um, and that's a long-term process as well, and it kind of is just developmental in its own right. If anything there's new coming up, that's when new layers of that piece come up all the time. um but yeah, there's sort of two things that happen for me in those times, which is, one, is this actually something I need to be providing for myself? And two is, am I holding onto those old structures or roles? And like, is that actually important to me? Is that actually meeting my need? And what is this new role that I'm trying to like create with my partner? So it's not just focusing on like, oh, what is the old paradigm of the masculine or my father or whatever. It's like, actually, what are the qualities that I now have decided that are actually really important to have in a partner, in a father, in the what I would now say is being a man, rather than what I used to think was being a man. And then it would be like, oh, he's actually really present with my emotional body. Oh, I actually never had that as a child. Wow, that's so incredible to have now, someone who can be completely present and hold without judgment or shame me and my emotional body. Like, whoa, that's amazing. And then I can also feel the parts where, like, you have those layers come up. They're like, oh, be a man, that are all those things that you heard on repeat. And I don't know if those were things that perhaps your mother said, but sometimes the dynamic between the mother and the father, and how um there was like projection of her needs not being met onto him. I can feel those come up in the way that my mother reacts or used to react with my father, have been things that come up as patterns in my body as well, that I notice that have been perhaps even more confronting than all of those other things. But there's almost like conditioned cliches in how the feminine treats the masculine in that way, or like women treat men and bitch about them at bottomless brunches, or like these weird cultural things that we've like made really normal. I've grown up hearing people say, I'm like, wow, okay, that's pretty like weird that that person's supposed to be someone that you really love and trust, but that's how you talk about them behind their back. And like feeling that incongruency from a really young age of like, wow, these are how people are um, expressing about their most intimate relationships, and that's how they're treating each other. This seems like really not love or intimacy or relating. And so I guess part of the desire to do this work and to be around and create with people like you is to actually be evolving those really unhelpful and unloving ways of interacting and relating and being of yeah, respect and devotional worship and gratitude of your partner as well.
Yeah.
Um,
I think just getting really curious, like even just as for anyone that's listening, like getting really curious about what this is bringing up for you and what you're resonating with, what you're noticing within your own relationship, whether you're in one or like previous one, but just noticing what comes up in these spaces, because that's where we can start to really see, like when you were saying, like getting curious around, is this coming from conditioning? Is this true for me?
mm,
Am I projecting here? Like projection has been a
mm,
massive one for me, of how much I have projected at my partner, of things that I have really believed and had a lot of evidence to back up the what I believed and what I
mm,
was experiencing. But really, when I took that radical self-responsibility and got brutally honest, I could actually see where it wasn't the absolute truth. Just even in that like reliability, like constantly feeling like I can't rely on my partner, I can't trust him, or I'll ask him to do something. Like even I remember talking to you about, like I'll ask him to go to the grocery store and he'll go to the grocery store and he's got my list and he'll get my things and he'll always forget one thing. It's so infuriating.
mm,
And like I would just throw a bit of a tantrum. Like, you forgot the one thing which was the most important thing, obviously. Like, how can you just, like, I
mm,
don't understand. You had the list. But I would like focus on
mm,
the one thing that was missing, rather than like the fact that I had someone that's willing to go to the grocery store for me, and get the things that I need. And there was almost like this, I guess, this expectation of, you should go to the grocery store. I'm going to be the one that's like cooking the dinner. And so there
mm.
was like that lacking in appreciation and acknowledgement. And really, who wants to go and do things for someone that doesn't appreciate those things? And so it's again not shaming that that's where I was at in these different times, but just acknowledging, like, where is that coming from and what's that triggering for me, so that I can support that part that's hurting, because it's a much deeper wound.
Mm.
Like, that experience was only the trigger, it's not actually the thing.
Yeah.
So again, it's like, what is this bringing up for me and how can I support myself through that? And I love what you shared about how can I meet that need for myself? And it's something that I talk a lot about. So it's not about having, like, being completely independent in your relationship and not needing your
Mm.
partner, because obviously we still want to be connecting and supporting one another and feel needed,
Mm.
is actually really beautiful as well. But we don't want to be putting so much like expectation and obligation and, you must do this, you must be this for me. But it's like, how can I meet myself? How can I meet these needs? Is this something I actually need from my partner?
Mm.
Or is there a way that I can meet that for myself? And maybe it is something that you really need from your partner, but can I also meet it for myself? Because that's what I've noticed has shifted a lot for me, is the more I can meet my needs, the more that he just naturally like mirrors that and he starts to meet those needs,
Mm.
and it's just building this like, oh, this need is just so overflowingly met, like so abundantly met. And to a point where I don't even necessarily need to ask for it. It's just being mirrored back to me. And I
Mm.
shared a story in the podcast a little while ago around resentment, and how actually the resentment I was feeling towards Liam was actually resentment I had been holding toward myself. So there was a
Mm.
projection there. And even though I had all the evidence to back up how he had done this and he had done that, when I got to the core essence of what was really hurting inside, it was that I wasn't supporting me. I wasn't showing up for me. I had been holding myself back from a lot of my dreams. And there was like this projection toward him. And as I was going through these layers and integrating all this stuff, I found that the resentment just, it was very easy. It like just dissolved, releasing it toward him, because it
Mm.
wasn't even about him. And then in that process, he started to show up in the ways that I would usually nag him to, or expect him to, or want him to, or get annoyed when he didn't. And I didn't even have
Mm,
to ask. He would just, again, he was just mirroring it. And I was like, wow, that just feels so nourishing.
mm,
Because it didn't feel like I actually need him to do this anymore, because the deeper need had been met just by honoring that part of me that was deeply hurting. And he's an incredible space holder, so he was with me through this whole process. And then, yeah, it was just really fascinating that the next morning he was like off to the grocery store to get some things, and then he got back and he was starting to prep our food. And I was just like, wow, these are things that you wouldn't usually do. And I'm not even asking
mm.
you to. I don't even necessarily need you to. Like, I'm actually happy to just go and deal with it. And but the appreciation I felt as well, of just like, oh, that feels so nice.
Mm,
Mm.
yes. Yeah. I think it's just finding a doorway in, I guess, in a way. These things that come in a relationship are always just another doorway in. And anytime anything's coming up, that's why I love that the question around can I meet this need myself? Is because, yeah, sometimes you can't or you don't want to and you want to ask for it, but it's more there's a dropping of the fears around if it's not met, like it doesn't mean anything. And I
Mm.
think that's where a lot of um, the gripping or the controlling or the fear and all of the things that kind of spill out and over is always just because we're not tending to something within ourselves that really needs to be tended to. And it's just such an obvious place for all these things to come up. Like family relationships, they just are so close to us that they're poking these things all the time. And it's, yeah, like you say, it's usually never about them or never about the scenario. And you can find evidence anywhere you look. Like if that's the direction you're looking, you'll find whatever you need to back up anything you're trying to claim.
Yeah.
Um, but it's such a perfect doorway into, oh, like, you know, where am I? And I don't know if this is your particular experience, but this is what comes up for me and what was coming to mind when we were speaking about reliability. Usually reliability ties into, for me, actually, where am I self-abandoning? Where am I not making myself a priority? Where am I not like running to my own needs at the drop of a hat? Where am I I guess outsourcing my self prioritization as well and needing to experience that through someone else rather than experiencing that through myself. And yeah, there's such a, I guess, energetic component that happens that you just described as well, where when you're in the energy of really trying to like grapple on or um, and manipulate in a way, and I don't mean manipulate as anything bad or wrong, but when we're trying to shape someone into meeting our needs without being able to be direct or without meeting our needs ourselves, they can energetically feel that, and there's a repelling there, a repulsion there, and that's why there's kind of like that. Oh, like I don't want to really do that thing anymore,
Yeah.
because it's not actually from a heartfelt place. And then when you can actually meet that part of yourself and then come with a real request, most of the time, like 99% of the time, if you can come with a real request that actually means something to you, that's like away from blaming or shaming or projecting or that they can really feel that request from you, they're probably going to say yes because they love you and they want to make you happy, unless it's something that goes against their, own needs.
Yeah.
If they can feel the energy behind it, it's 99% of the time is a yes.
Yeah. And it's definitely what I've experienced as well. Like when I can lead from my heart and be like, I'm really in my authenticity of like
Mm,
voicing even like expressing why it's important, like that's something that's important to my partner to
Mm,
understand, like especially if something's not important to him and it's something that I've kind of been like, this actually is like it needs to be done. It might seem silly, but it's important to me. And if I can explain why, and that's actually good for me because it also helps me to get clarity around like, well, why is this important? Like, why is this a
mm,
non-negotiable? Or am I actually still coming from that disempowered place or needing to control because I don't
mm.
feel safe? Because that's what I would tend to go to of like, I need to control the situation in order to create a sense of
Yeah.
safety. And that self-inquiry of like, is this actually a need or am I just trying to control the situation?
Mm,
And starting to feel into the qualities of where am I feeling disempowered in my requests and where am I feeling empowered. So it's like as I was going through the like the awareness around where I'm projecting and taking that responsibility and
mm.
releasing the resentment, my requests became like cleaner. Like there was more clarity around them.
Yeah.
It was coming from the heart, and I didn't have to nag or beg or manipulate or try and control or force or threaten or like any of these things that we might go into to try and get our needs met. Because again, these are like learned behaviors
Yeah.
and like conditioned behaviors. When I was actually able to really come from that clarity of heart, there was actually a lot less requests. And
Yes.
the
Yeah.
requests that I asked were met. And it's also about like reciprocity of like, am I also willing to meet my partner's needs? Like, it's not just all about me. Like, a
Mm,
lot of the time we can be like, oh, my partner's not doing this. And well, there's like a tendency, especially with a lot of people that I communicate with, of like, I give everything, I do everything, I'm
mm.
giving so much. It's like, but did they request that you do that, or are you just doing that? Are you just assuming that this is what they want? Because that's what I was doing, is I was doing so
Mm,
much, giving so much, but my partner never asked for it, and then I'm getting resentful because he's not appreciating it. Like, but he didn't even ask for it. So it doesn't mean that there isn't place for appreciation, but it's like the more that I came into that clarity, the more I actually felt his, like, especially recently, there's been more shifts that we've gone through where I can
mm.
feel his appreciation without him saying it. But when I,
Yeah.
like, for a while, when there was a lot of this projection and this resentment, there was like, you're not appreciating me. And it's like, well, it's fascinating because it's like it's not like he's saying it now, but I feel it now because there's a lot of that baggage that's
Mm,
been released and there's a lot more of that clarity due to the inner workings that I've been doing for myself. But yeah, it's like even just feeling into that quality of where am I feeling disempowered? Where am I feeling empowered when I'm
mm,
like in that request of my partner?
mm. And in that process, also being able to um, take a pause and a break is something I'm finding I have to practice, is because it's almost I guess happening as we're communicating or over communicating. I know I'm not in a place of feeling empowered if I over communicate, because expressing feelings and needs actually don't take a very lengthy story, because there's actually no real story or narrative that needs to be put around it if we're not trying to, I guess, control it before it's received. So there's times where I'm almost having to pull myself back and in that mid process and actually saying, actually, I need to pause and leave and feel into this more deeply, because I can feel that I'm actually not coming from a heart-centered place. And yeah, I'm digging a deeper hole for myself. Um, but yeah, it's there's not when I can't feel the cleanness in it. Um, in communication now, it's so much easier to say, actually, I need to take some space to find out what it is that I actually need. Because even as I'm saying it, I can feel in my body that there's a disconnection between what I'm saying and what I actually feel to be true.
Yeah.
Um, but there are old parts of me that would just keep going and going and going until I got to the thing finally.
Yeah.
And then and I guess that's maybe what people call conflict or arguing, or where you just like
Yeah.
go and go and go until you like the thing finally reveals itself.
Yeah.
And there's a resolution and a relaxation and oh fuck finally, but there was a lot of destruction in and around that because you just couldn't be clear on the thing.
Yeah.
um
Sometimes it can feel like you're just having the same conversation again and again, and
mm,
you're looping because you don't actually have that clarity of what you're communicating, what you're asking for, what's actually at the core of it. We're like still on the
yeah.
surface layer of you're not meeting this need, you're not supporting me, and it's like we're missing a lot of the deeper layers of what's really going on. And that's what
mm,
I noticed was playing out for Liam and I in the earlier days of just this constant looping because I was so
mm,
fixated on the story rather than
yeah.
actually the truth of what was really going on. And now, like through practice, there's this quite a strong discernment of when I'm feeling certain sensations in my body or I'm trying to like force getting my point across or like trying to get him to
Mm.
understand what I'm complaining about rather than
Mhm.
actually processing that for myself and getting that clarity and then coming to him from the heart and actually communicating this is what's upsetting me or this is what's triggering me, this is what's coming up for me.
Mm.
It's a very different conversation when we come from that place of self-responsibility of like this is what's being triggered and I understand that this is actually mine. And
Mm.
when I come from that place, he's more willing to support me. He doesn't have to do
Yeah.
it for me and he can't do it for me, but he can support me in that healing, integration space. But if I'm like, that you are the cause of this, you must fix this, you must show up differently, you
Mm.
must change this in order to meet my need, or you have to do this, there's quite a like a controlling aspect of like
Mm.
it can even bring up feelings for them of like, well, you're not good enough, you're not being a good enough partner, you are not, which
Yeah.
is actually quite destructive to the relationship, which is what I noticed a lot of for Liam and I. So there's a lot of destruction in those earlier years. And then definitely in these kind of past, I'd say 2 to 3, that's where we started doing a lot of the more integrative work where there was a lot more awareness.
Mm.
And I feel like there's always more layers revealing themselves. Like I said, we've just gone through another massive process where a lot has shifted,
Mm.
especially recently. And I feel like that's where the potency is as well of like, I was sharing recently around how like I love learning and I love investing in like programs and coaches and doing this deeper work for
Mm.
myself. But really it's in life that we get the like deep initiations and shifts where we get to implement what we're learning. And so it's like relationships, it's like running my business, it's motherhood, like that's where the potency and the medicine really is. And then we get to utilize the tools and the support from these different programs or podcasts or whatever it is we're delving into, books that we're reading. We get to implement that,
Mm.
but life is where it's really happening. So it's like
Yeah.
relationships are going to bring up so much, like stepping into putting yourself out there and running a business is going to bring up so much. Motherhood's going to bring up so much, just friendships and life in general. And I loved what you shared about exploring, or just the part about like, I'm going to take a moment.
Mm.
It's like a invitation to take a pause.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, just
Mm.
the giving space to like your partner saying no is
Mm.
what was coming up around that discomfort around hearing the no. and that fear of
Mm,
like, what if they say no to my request? And
mm,
like, that's okay. And we've got to get more comfortable with people saying no and also with us saying no.
yeah.
And then we can really respect not only the no's but the yeses, and we can know that the yes is a real, true, authentic yes. And how much
Mm,
better does it feel when you've got that true, authentic yes rather than like the obligation yes or the like fearful yes or like, oh, I don't really want to, but I guess I should or I have to. It actually doesn't feel
yeah.
good to get those yeses, to be honest. Like,
No.
there might be a little girl inside that's like, hee hee hee, I got what I want. And that's okay. But like that true authentic yes, when we're talking about how like your partner wants to show up for you, like you're
Mm,
doing life together, like we get to do life with this person. We're not like we don't like for me anyway, I don't want to be in a relationship where the person feels obligated to stay or obligated
mm,
to meet the needs or do the things or just kind of gets on with it. Like it actually feels really good when we can come from those heartfelt requests and we feel how much our partner actually wants to meet that and show up for that, and also vice versa when my
mm,
partner is like vulnerable with me and I get that opportunity to really meet him and be with him, like give that to him, is a really beautiful exchange.
mm. Yeah, that was there's an interesting relationship there between I'm not sure the exact words that you said, but it was something about how the relationship between how fearful you are to receive somebody's no and how capable you feel or how much permission you feel or how much you allow yourself to say no. Those are pretty pretty interlinked in a way. And it's yeah, I guess quite tied into the cultural paradigm of the overgiving and the martyrdom and there's an element of trust that comes up. That was something that I hadn't really been able to verbalize or maybe didn't realize I was experiencing for a really long time until my current partner, when because he's from Italy, so I guess we have very different cultures around what we say and what we're allowed to say to family members, and he's like it's really hard to be able to trust what people say
Mm.
because people always just say yes here out of obligation. Like, and I actually don't know when people are telling me the truth or not because you guys keep saying yes to things that you don't want to do. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess I'd never really felt into it being a particular cultural significance, but it is actually really true here. And I was like, yeah, actually, I notice I've experienced that through friendships and through relationships. And I notice the almost relationship breakdown or mistrust that it creates when other people are saying yes outside of their own boundaries, and when
Yeah.
you happen to be sensitive enough to feel that,
Yeah.
and then you check in, which most of us are sensitive enough to feel that,
Yeah.
and then you check in, they're like, no, 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 and you're like, but I can feel that's 100% a no, but they're pushing that obligation because they feel like they have to, and then it's like you're both doing this thing that you both know you don't really want to be there doing, and it feels so like um dirty is the only word coming into my
Yeah.
mind. Like there's like such a dirty, messy, mulchy, ick about it when it's being done from this place, but out of this culture of politeness of saying yes to everything, we can't clean that up.
Yeah. Yeah, I've noticed that similar in my own relationship. Like Liam would just tend to say yes all the time, but he
Mm,
wouldn't necessarily follow through. or he might do it in a few
Mm.
days' time. Like, yes was not actually like, yeah, I'm going to get up and do it now. It was just like, it almost felt like a yes to shut me up.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't necessarily like know if that's necessarily where he was coming from. Like, he would just be like, yep, 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 all good. And then because it wasn't a priority to him, he would just forget about it. So that's where it was
Mm.
like, where we had that conversation around like me actually having that clarity of what's truly important, like what's a real authentic request and why it's important, and having that conversation with him. So rather than just kind of willy nilly just asking him to do a bunch of stuff every day, that he's just like, it's just going to kind of go over the head. But like, just also acknowledging where I was just like asking for things that I didn't necessarily need, again, from coming from that place
Mm.
of maybe even just trying to test, like, can I trust you? And are you
Yeah,
reliable? Are you going to shop for me? Like, do you really love me? And there's like almost this unconscious trying to test him and
yeah.
then getting the answer that I was expecting to get to validate the story and the experience. So it was quite
Hmm.
fascinating becoming really aware of that as well. Um, but yeah, I actually would prefer, and I've even had that conversation numerous times with Liam, like I'd rather you said no if it's a no. Like I don't want
Mm.
this. If you're gonna say yes to something, show up and follow through with it. Like that's really important to me. And having even that kind of conversation to say, this is what when you do this brings up for me. This is what I need. Like that's where the real request was of like I actually need you to honor
Mm.
your yeses and your nos. If it's a yes, follow through. If it's a no, yes, it's uncomfortable and I'm very transparent about that of like, yeah, it's hard when you first like start to like really sit with getting the no. That can feel like
Mm.
rejection. But sitting with that and processing it is actually really potent and powerful. And then since
Mm.
having those conversations, he's more able to honor his yeses, his nos, his boundaries. And I'm also feeling more respect towards him and trusting in him that when it's a no, it's a no. When it's a yes, it's a yes. And that's really shifted our relationship as well. But again, it's like, how much do I honor my yes, my no? Like, and
Mm.
that was another practice of really feeling into my body, even with the small things. I feel like you always start with the small things, like to build that
Yeah.
muscle. But even like I was doing things out of obligation. For example, I'd go to the coffee shop and I'm like, oh, I guess I should get him a coffee, or I should get him like, I'd
Mm.
look in the cabinet and see like something that I know he would like. And I would always get him something, but then he would never do it for me. Or I say never, but that's probably a generalization. But very, like, it wasn't very often that it would be reciprocated. And that was creating a lot of resentment of like, I always get you something. I'm always like thinking about what you would like or appreciate. Why aren't you doing that for me? And again, the story
Mm.
that I would feed. And so what I decided to do was actually feel in my body of like, can I do this from a place of not needing it to be returned? Like, is it coming from that authentic place of I'm getting the coffee or the muffin from a place of like love rather than expectation of needing it in return? And so I stopped
Mm.
doing it for a while. And I don't even know that he necessarily noticed.
Mm.
Like, it wasn't a big deal to him because, again, he wasn't asking me to do this. And even if he did ask me to get him a coffee and I didn't read my text and I got there and there was no coffee, he wouldn't throw it in my face like maybe sometimes I might do in the past of like, I asked you to get this list for the grocery store and you missed this one thing and like getting really worked up about it. And so it was just that process of like, okay, let me feel into my body. Can I come from that authentic place rather than just giving from that conditioning of overgiving? And so then when I actually started to bring back the giving, it actually felt like an authentic gift. Like I'm not expecting you
Mm.
to go and get me a gift because I did this for you or I gave this to you. And it actually became nourishing. Like the act of giving became really nourishing for me and filling up my cup rather than depleting my cup.
Mm. Yeah, that's really beautiful. Mm.
Mm. Yeah, we might start to wrap up the conversation. It is starting to feel like it's coming to
Mm.
its natural completion anyway. But if there is
Yeah.
anything you want to bring into the space before we do, I'd like to chat a little bit about, or just kind of mention, like, if anyone is wanting to delve a little bit more deeply into this conversation and how to confidently express yourself, how to connect to your yes and your no. Like for me, the authentic yes and no comes from like that connection to the body and that like how do I
Mm.
feel what that sensation of empowerment, disempowerment feels like? How do I know what the yes
Mm.
feels like, the no feels like? How do I get that discernment and that intuition and that inner knowing? We do have a pretty incredible program that's starting this weekend that Amberlee and I are actually co-creating, and it's called The Confidence to Express Yourself. So I'm going to be guiding 3 of those modules, and Amberlee is going to be guiding one of those modules. So I'm
Mm.
really excited for that, for anyone that does want to delve more deeply into this conversation with us. But yeah, if there's anything else you want to bring into the space, Amberlee.
I'm just taking a few breaths to kind of let a lot of that settle into my body. Is Yeah, there's a lot in that conversation.
I feel like it could be like expanded upon in like a full series, or
Yeah,
like there's so much here we could dive into.
yeah, and that's where I could feel myself wanting to stop and just breathe because I was like, I can feel where I could talk about this or go into so much more depth into any of the pieces that we touched into. But there was that moment of checking into my body and being like, would that actually serve right now? Because it already feels so full, or like it would be oversaturated, or too much sensation, or too much stimulation, if that makes sense. And there was a real desire to actually just let all of that settle, to kind of um, soften and open, and I guess let anything that's been brought up by that conversation to have some space, and then be okay with there being more spaces in the future for that to open up into, if that makes sense. Like I
Yeah,
could almost like feel into that little bit of scarcity. All of that must be spoken about now because there'll never be another time.
yeah,
And then coming back into my heart moment of like, oh, these are lifetime discussions
yeah,
and lifetime pieces, and so much of them are so directly related to the pieces that you're bringing through on those modules, on the confidence to express, and being able to find more connection with the body to feel into when's too much, when do I need to like settle back down and in so that that can integrate, and where can I um open up when it feels true again. So I think that was just almost like a really beautiful in the moment process of tying that
yeah.
in a way.
Yeah, and it really feels like, yeah, the confidence to express it's like there's 4 modules that are going to be about 3 hours each, where we can really dive into these conversations, but also go into the embodiment. So it's not just head
Mm,
based; it's actually let's
yeah.
integrate and bring that into the body and implement what we're talking about. So that's definitely going to be quite a magical experience. But I'm also feeling like I want to feel into maybe like even a little practice, and I'll sit with it for a little bit just to support the integration of this conversation of where our
Mm.
listeners, anyone that's listening, can really what they can take from this to really implement. Some journal prompts I'm feeling would be really, really powerful. So I feel like maybe
Mm.
we can sit with that over the next kind of day or so and just yeah, what I'm feeling is I might open up the conversation inside the Woman Ascending Facebook group, For anyone that's not on Facebook, I also have the app community, so that we've had some rebranding with the app. It's now Embodied Love app, and it's free to download, and there's a beautiful integration program in there. But yeah, I'm just gonna find somewhere to open that conversation where we can maybe get some questions that we can answer. We can see where others want us to maybe delve deeper, because we could like go in so many directions. But I'd love to actually hear from our listeners of what resonated, what would be most supportive. Are there any questions or anything that you might want more clarity on or want us to delve deeper into? And then potentially we could do another conversation, and we can also open up that conversation in the Facebook group like I mentioned.
That feels really beautiful and complete. Thank you, Monique.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to the Good Girl Unleashed podcast. If you are loving this content, go ahead and subscribe to be notified of upcoming episodes. Please leave a 5-star review to help me get these powerful teachings and practices to those who need it. If you would like to submit a question or would like to know more about how we can work together, send me an email to info@moniquecamella.com. So much love to you, beautiful human. Until next time.